They didn't just kill, they made examples out of people, burnt bodies in broad daylight, left blood in the streets as a warning. In Kingston, Spanish Town, and beyond, fear didn't wear a badge. It wore names like Dudas, Jim Brown, Willie Haggart, and Black Man. These weren't just corner thugs, these were dons, generals, men who ran their blocks like empires. They controlled politics, police, and even the music scenes. They moved in silence, but their violence echoed loud. Cross them and you disappeared. No trial, no trace, just fire, bullets, and silence. Dudas ruled Tivoli like royalty. Jim Brown made men vanish without a sound. Black Man turned Spanish Town into a war zone. And Haggart? He danced with death and ran with kings. This is the story of Jamaica's real bad men, the dons who didn't just run the streets, they rewrote the rules of power one body at a time. Join us as we dig into the lives of the real bad men, the dons who built empires off fear, bullets, and blood right in the heart of Jamaica. You see, Jamaica isn't just sun, sand, and sweet music. Out here, the real soundtrack is gunshots in the dark and sirens in the distance. On these streets, turf is everything, and the dons run it like war generals. Every block has its own rules, and crossing the wrong line can get you zipped up by morning. And this island isn't just fighting local beef. It's in the middle of a storm, one cooked up by South American cartels, borderless gangs, and a flood of high-powered rifles. Speaking of which, everyone knows Jamaica's been part of the drug game for decades. It's always been a transit yard, meaning cocaine comes in from Colombia and Venezuela, moves through the island, then gets shipped off to places like the US and Canada. Even though police say drug busts have gone up and down over the years, people still believe that more drugs are moving through now than before. And why wouldn't they? After the recent pandemic, cartels started pushing harder, especially from Colombia. The streets felt it, the dons felt it, and the cops had to level up. And so Jamaica didn't just sit back though, the system had to react. They brought more heat to the ports, more eyes on the coast, and linked up with international players like the US, CARICOM, even Interpol. The Jamaican Constabulary Force, MOCA, the military, they all tried to clamp down. But the truth is, you can't stop a beast that's already loose. Back in the day, the game had structure. It had names that held weight. Men like Christopher Dudas Coke, top shotter, born into it. His father built the Shower Posse, but Dudas turned it into a global machine. Jamaica, New York, Miami, Toronto, the man had reach. And when he got grabbed in 2010, everything cracked. With no big Don to hold the reins, the streets started splitting, and when empires fall, war follows. Now it's chaos. Smaller crews, no big boss, just soldiers trying to eat. Everybody wants their own corner, their own shot at power. But when there's no rules, that's when it gets real dangerous. Every Don wants to be the next legend. Every block's a battleground. And with the straps in steady supply and the coke still moving, it's clear that Jamaica's war isn't slowing down, just like it never did. So let's talk about the gangs that made it this way. Starting with Jim Brown and the rise of Shower Posse. In the late 1970s, the streets of Kingston were changing fast. Claudius "Claudie" Massop, a feared name in Tivoli Gardens, was killed in a shootout with police. That moment flipped everything. His death left a vacuum, and into that space stepped his protege, Lester Lloyd Coke. The streets called him Jim Brown, but others knew him as Don Dada. He didn't just take charge of Claudie's Phoenix gang, he transformed it into something far bigger, far deadlier. That gang would soon be known as the Shower Posse. Jim Brown built an empire that ran on drugs, guns, and blood. He had the political backing, the firepower, and the soldiers to run entire blocks, not just in Jamaica, but in the US too. He was more than just a gangster. He was a warlord in denim. And when people spoke about him, they spoke low, like they knew saying his name too loud could bring trouble. Some say he was there the night Bob Marley got shot in 1976, a sign of just how deep in the game he really was. But Jim Brown wasn't working alone. And the Shower Posse's reach wasn't just about one man. That's where Vivian Blake comes in. Vivian Blake, the street scholar turned kingpin. Vivian Blake didn't come from riches. He was raised in West Kingston, same place the gun smoke hung heavy. But the boy had brains, got himself a scholarship to St. George's College, a fancy private school. But life had other plans. In 1973, Blake moved to New York, and that's where he flipped the script. Started small, pushing marijuana. But the hustle grew fast. By the 1980s, Blake was moving heavyweight, cocaine and crack through neighborhoods like Soundview, Crotona Park, and Bronx River. Some even say Blake helped start the crack game in the States. Whether true or not, one thing's clear, he was moving tons. And he wasn't shy about it. While Jim Brown was building up the Shower Posse back in Jamaica, Blake was laying down roots across America. He became the face of the U.S. operations, making sure the money flowed both ways. Blake had soldiers in Miami, New York, Philly, Chicago, Louisiana, and beyond. Wherever Jamaicans settled, the posse followed, and the link between the two men, it was deadly. With Brown running things from Kingston and Blake handling business in the U.S., the Shower Posse became untouchable. But their power wasn't built by drugs alone. Guns and politics were in the mix too. Tivoli Gardens, Kingston, that was Shower Posse territory. And it wasn't just turf, it was political headquarters. Jim Brown wasn't just a Don, he was the muscle behind the Jamaica Labor Party, JLP. After Claude Massop's death, Brown became the JLP's strongman in West Kingston. Around this time, Edward Siega and the JLP came to power, beating out Michael Manley's People's National Party, PNP. Manley was tight with Castro in Cuba. The U.S. didn't like that. So what did they do? They backed the JLP hard. And with that support came deals. The JLP promised to crack down on weed, Jamaica's money crop, to get U.S. approval. But that move wiped out income for many. With ganja fields burned, folks needed a new hustle. And cocaine filled that gap. The Shower Posse didn't miss a beat. They took over the new drug trade, flooding streets with product while building an even stronger network. It's been said the CIA had a hand in arming, training, and transporting Shower Posse members to the States. Whether whispered or true, the gang's access to guns and freedom of movement spoke loud. And this was no ordinary street crew. This was organized power, backed by politics, fueled by drugs, and protected by silence. But with power comes rivals. And when the posse expanded into the U.S., they weren't the only gang in the game. Vivian Blake wasn't playing small ball. He wasn't just sending drugs into one city. He was building an entire drug empire across the U.S. in cities like New York, Philly, Camden, Newark, and Miami. The Shower Posse set up shop. They had Jamaican links, street soldiers, and heavy artillery. In Toronto, they laid their first Canadian roots. But the more you grow, the more enemies you make. In 1985, a big shootout at a Jamaican picnic in Oakland, New Jersey made headlines. Over 2,000 people were there when bullets started flying. The Shower Posse, Spangler Posse, Dog Posse, and Tel Aviv Posse turned a cookout into a war zone. 3 people were killed, 9 more were hit, and over 30 guns were picked up by police. That day, the streets knew. Jamaican gangs were no joke. Then came Philly. In the 80s and 90s, the Shower Posse locked horns with the Junior Black Mafia, battling for control of Southwest Philadelphia. Blood was spilled, and the city got caught in the crossfire. Donovan Clark opened a Shower Posse branch in South Jersey, but Dog Posse challenged them hard. As the crews clashed, the streets became battlegrounds and law enforcement took notice. In 1988, a federal grand jury in Miami indicted 34 Shower Posse members, including Blake and Jim Brown. The law was closing in, but these men weren't just thugs. They were ghosts when they had to be. Still, not every ghost stays hidden forever. By 1990, the U.S. Justice Department had enough. They wanted Jim Brown, and they weren't asking. Brown was arrested by ATF, U.S. Marshals, and Jamaican authorities. He was locked up in Kingston's General Penitentiary, waiting for extradition on murder and drug charges. But before he could be sent off, the Don burned to death in his prison cell in 1992. They said it was a fire, but nobody believed that. There was no clear source, no accident report that made sense. Many believed Jim Brown was silenced and taken out before he could speak. Speaking of which, days earlier, his eldest son, Mark "Ja T. Coke, had been gunned down while riding a bike through St. Andrew. Not long after, his daughter, Mumpy, was also killed in a shootout, along with her husband. That year, the Coke family was under fire, and the kingdom was falling apart. But the game don't stop. After Jim Brown died, his adopted son, Christopher Dudas Koch, stepped in. He took over the Shower Posse, keeping the name alive, the business running, and the fear intact, which we will take a look at in the coming parts. For now, what Jim Brown and Vivian Blake built wasn't just a gang. It was a machine, a mix of power, politics, drugs, and death. They left behind a name that still echoes in the streets, and that name is Shower Posse. And as long as that name exists, the war never truly ends. The rise of Christopher Dudas Koch. Christopher Koch wasn't born into a normal life. He was born straight into the game. His father, Lester Lloyd Koch, the man the streets knew as Jim Brown, was one of the deadliest dons Jamaica ever saw. Jim Brown ran the infamous Shower Posse that spread fear from Kingston to New York. So when Jim died in a mysterious prison fire in 1992, it wasn't just the end of one reign, it was the start of another. That's when Dudas took over. At just 23 years old, Christopher Dudas Koch stepped into his father's shoes. You see, when Christopher Dudas Koch took control of Tivoli Gardens in 1992, he inherited more than just a neighborhood. He inherited an empire. His father, Lester Lloyd Koch, had built the Shower Posse from the ground up. Now it was Dudas's turn to lead, and he did, but in a different style. He didn't just carry on the legacy, he made it bigger. While his father built the foundation, Dudas ran the whole kingdom. He was feared as the head of the Shower Posse, but also loved by many in Tivoli Gardens, where he acted more like a president than a criminal. He gave money to the poor, started programs for kids, and even helped people find jobs. Some say the police couldn't even enter Tivoli without his okay. On the streets, he was more powerful than the law. And in the eyes of his supporters, he wasn't just a don, he was the president. He wasn't like the old school dons who relied only on bullets and fear. Dudas was smart. He handled business like a man who understood how to survive in a world where power meant staying under the radar. U.S. prosecutors say Dudas was behind the trafficking of tons of marijuana and cocaine over nearly 20 years. His main base in the U.S. was the Bronx, but he had serious links in Toronto too. Unlike the blood-soaked days of the 80s, Koch kept things tighter. Several sources say he avoided unnecessary violence in the U.S. He didn't want to stir up law enforcement. He kept it clean where it counted. Even Jamaica's National Security Minister, Peter Bunting, said he was a little more business savvy than your typical criminal. Dudas ran front companies like Presidential Click and Incomparable Enterprises and used high-end camera systems and tech. This wasn't just street hustle, this was strategy. But while the streets of New York quieted under his rule, back home in Jamaica, things were getting darker. Violence was exploding. The murder rate was one of the highest in the world. Gunmen from Tivoli were blamed for many of the killings, especially against rival garrisons. Dudas may have been a calm face, but his reach was backed by firepower. Speaking of which, while Dudas was rising, Vivian Blake, the other giant of the Shower Posse, had already fallen. After the gang was tied to multiple killings in Miami, Blake ran back to Jamaica to dodge the heat, but it caught up to him in 1999. He was extradited to the U.S. and stood in court, finally pleading guilty in 2000. His charges included racketeering, conspiracy, and more. He admitted it all, his role in the murders, the drug empire, the violence. Blake was given 28 years, but after just 8, he got out on parole. And when he finally returned to Jamaica, the streets had changed. His health was failing, and not long after, he died in March 2010. At only 53 years old, Blake was gone. A man once credited with flooding the Bronx with crack, now laid low by a heart attack and kidney disease. But Blake's legacy, like Jim Brown's and Dudas's, didn't die with him. It lived on in the streets, in the young hustlers who grew up under their shadow. Coming back to the kingpin Dudas, what was he doing, and what fate was written for him in the world of cartels, cocaine, and violence? What made Dudas so powerful wasn't just fear, it was love. In Tivoli Gardens, he was more than a don. He was a provider, protector, and judge. Koch handed out school books and supplies to children. He organized free concerts with top reggae artists, real community events, and the people loved him for it. Even big names like Bunny Wailer, Bob Marley's stepbrother, recorded songs praising coke. The love was deep, almost cult-like. He ran the streets with rules, and if you crossed those rules, you paid the price. Speaking of which, a shower posse member told a story about a public beating of an arpist carried out under Coke's orders. The people in Tivoli didn't call the police. They had dudas. And while outsiders saw him as a drug kingpin, inside Tivoli, he was the president. He punished crime in the community, kept order, and made sure families had food. Even police knew they had to ask permission before stepping into his turf. Security Minister Peter Bunting said it straight. Dudas had republic-like status. He ran a zone where the gang, the politics, and the community were all one. It was something no Don before him had achieved. But power that big doesn't go unnoticed forever. In 2009, the United States decided they were done waiting. They hit Coke with charges for drug and gun trafficking and demanded he be sent to New York. But there was a problem. Jamaica's Prime Minister at the time, Bruce Golding, didn't agree. He said the evidence used by the U.S. came from illegal wiretaps, and he refused to approve the extradition. That refusal sparked chaos. People believed Golding was protecting Coke, not justice. That's when opposition leaders went after him. U.S. officials started making noise, and under the heat, Golding cracked. On May 17, 2010, an arrest warrant was finally issued for Dudas. What followed was pure war. Coke's gunmen attacked police stations. Kingston was placed under a state of emergency. The army moved in, backed by cops. But this wasn't just Tivoli. Other garrisons rose up too, showing just how far Dudas's influence reached. During the operation, security forces were accused of serious human rights abuses. People said civilians were shot, even if unarmed. It was one of the bloodiest showdowns since Jamaica's independence in 1962. Over 500 suspected gang members were arrested and held at a national stadium. Coke somehow escaped the battle, but not for long. By June 2010, Christopher Dudas Coke knew his time was up. The empire his father built and that he ran with an iron grip was crashing around him. The streets of Tivoli had already turned into a war zone. Soldiers were everywhere. Gunmen were either dead or locked up, and the pressure from the U.S. was heating up by the hour. But when the cops finally caught Dudas, it wasn't during a shootout or a standoff. It was during a quiet roadblock outside Kingston, and what made the capture even more shocking was how he was dressed. Dudas had gone full disguise, wig, women's sunglasses, and a spare wig in the bag. He wasn't alone either. Riding beside him was Reverend Al Miller, a well-known church leader. Miller later told the police that Dudas was scared for his life. He thought if he surrendered to Jamaican police, he'd be killed, just like his father, Jim Brown, who burned to death in a prison cell waiting to be extradited. Coke was trying to reach the U.S. Embassy to turn himself in, but the disguise didn't work. The security forces spotted him, recognized him, and it was over. Knowing what happened to his father, Dudas made a decision. He gave up his right to fight extradition and chose to go straight to the U.S. He said, "I take this decision for I now believe it to be in the best interest of my family, the community of Western Kingston, and in particular, the people of Tivoli Gardens, and above all, Jamaica." But the real battle was still ahead, in court. After the arrest, Dudas was taken to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City, locked away under heavy guard. At first, in May 2011, he pleaded not guilty, but by August that year, in front of Judge Robert P. Patterson Jr., Coke changed his story. He pleaded guilty to trafficking huge amounts of cocaine and marijuana into the U.S. and to approving violent attacks, including the stabbing of a drug dealer in New York. The trial dragged on. The sentencing date was pushed multiple times. Coke's lawyers and U.S. prosecutors both needed more time to collect statements and evidence. The defense painted Dudas as a man who had done wrong, yes, but also as a community leader, a philanthropist, someone who had given back to his people. They brought in family and supporters who spoke about his kindness and good manners, but the prosecutors came hard. They painted a picture of a brutal Don, a man who ruled with fear. They said he was involved in at least 5 murders. One story stood out. A man who stole drugs from Coke was allegedly dismembered with a chainsaw. That's how far it went. Jamaican authorities handed over wiretap recordings from Coke's phone, over 50,000 conversations going back to 2004. The evidence was overwhelming, and in June 2012 it ended. Coke was sentenced to 23 years in prison, 20 for racketeering and conspiracy, and 3 more for conspiracy to commit assault. The man who once ran a kingdom was now just an inmate, registered as 02257, 748, locked up at Fort Dix Correctional Facility in New Jersey. His release date was set, January 25, 2030, but while all eyes were on Coke, the island was falling apart. The violence surrounding his arrest didn't just destroy parts of Tivoli Gardens, it shook Jamaica's reputation. For years, the country had sold itself as a tropical paradise. Beaches, music, and sunshine brought in millions of tourists. But now, the world saw images of Kingston burning, soldiers on rooftops, and bodies in the streets. In the weeks after the arrest warrant was issued, more than 76 people were killed in clashes between Coke's men and Jamaican security forces. Gunmen firebombed buildings, and whole neighborhoods were turned inside out. The government declared a state of emergency. Tivoli wasn't the only place that rose up. Other garrisons loyal to Coke also turned violent. What happened wasn't just street warfare, it became a national crisis. Despite the chaos, Jamaica's tourism didn't collapse. Visitor numbers dipped only 2.4% and quickly bounced back. That's because the majority of the violence happened deep in the garrisons, away from the resorts and beaches. Still, the tension between the tourist image and the street reality was now out in the open. Even tourist zones like Montego Bay weren't untouched. Gangs from the garrison still moved drugs and ran prostitution rings in those areas. But for a short time, there was a drop in killings. Homicides dropped by 34% after Coke was locked up, from 1,683 in 2009 to 1,113 in 2011. Most believe this drop came from the mass arrest of Coke's gunmen during the state of emergency. But peace didn't last forever. When Dudas fell, something important broke with him: the balance of fear and order in Tivoli Gardens. He may have been a drug boss, but he kept the violence under control inside his turf. After he was gone, no single man stepped up to replace him. Instead, 4 different groups began fighting to fill the vacuum. With no Don to call the shots, the streets turned wild. Some people in Tivoli even missed the days of Dudas. Market trader Romino Wilkins said it best: "Dudas may have done some bad things, but he kept order. Now you don't know who these bad men on the street are, and they are out of control." Coke had run his zone like a boss, laying down rules, keeping rival crews in check, and protecting the people that backed him. But now, nobody knew who to trust. And with 4 different gangs now trying to claim power, the gunshots came back, and the murder count started climbing again. It became clear that removing the Don didn't solve the problem, it just split it into pieces. His trial and prison sentence sent a clear message: when you become too famous, you become a target. Coke had a personality cult. He had fans, supporters, even reggae songs written about him. And that kind of attention made it easier for U.S. agencies to track him down. So now Jamaican traffickers are playing the game differently. But the real question is, how did the game change after Dudas? After Coke's arrest in 2010, something in Jamaica cracked. The Dudas affair wasn't just the end of a gangster. It shook the entire political system. It was one of the bloodiest events in Jamaica since it became independent in 1962. And politicians, realizing how deep the gang ties went, started backing away from the Dons. The support, the deals, the hidden handshakes, it all started to fade. But the streets, they don't wait for politics. With Dudas gone, the Shower posse splintered. What used to be one solid structure turned into multiple smaller crews. These new gangs stayed off the radar, moving smart, moving quiet. They were still shipping cocaine out and bringing guns back in, helping to keep the Caribbean hot as a drug route. The power was still there, just more spread out. Less show, more survival. To understand how this all began, you have to go back. Back to the 1960s, when Jamaica gained independence. The country had deep gaps between the rich and the poor. The poor ended up in urban ghettos like Kingston's West Side. That's where the Dons rose. They weren't just gangsters, they were neighborhood strongmen with real power. And both of Jamaica's major political parties, the JLP and PNP, started paying these dons to deliver votes, control people, and run the streets. The dons ran their blocks like military forts, known as garrisons. Tivoli Gardens, Dudas's home turf, was the most feared. One leader called it the mother of all garrisons. Soldiers had to fight just to get in. The walls spoke for themselves. Murals of dons and gunmen covered the streets, and while the political violence exploded at home, some Jamaicans took the game abroad. They moved to the US and started new networks. They moved weed and cocaine into America and guns back to Jamaica. That's how the Shower Posse was born in New York, out of Tivoli and the garrison culture. The name? According to one veteran member, it came from their way of handling enemies. He said it's simple. We wanted to stand out, so we showered them with gunfire. They didn't just want money, they wanted respect. They built their name through fear, fire, and full clips. Their U.S. boss was Vivian Blake, their Jamaican commander was Jim Brown. And when the world thought it couldn't get any worse, Dudas took the throne and showed them all what real power looked like. The fall of Dudas Coke didn't just shake the streets. It shook the politicians who had long danced with dons. For years, both the JLP and the PNP had used dons to keep control of votes in the garrisons. Tivoli Gardens always elected the JLP. That control came with deals, favors, and silence. But the Dudas affair made it clear. The dons had grown bigger than the politicians. Golding, who once defended Coke, lost public support. His party, the JLP, was defeated in the 2011 elections. The damage was done. The whole country had seen the truth. The link between politics and gangs was too deep. Delroy Chuck from the JLP admitted it. Many politicians stayed in power for decades because of the Don system. It is hard to break that umbilical cord. The politicians had relied on the Dons for too long. Now they were trying to distance themselves, but it wasn't going to be easy. What the Coke episode also taught Jamaica's criminals was simple. Being too famous gets you caught. Coke had songs written about him, his face was everywhere, and that spotlight made him a target. After his arrest, traffickers started moving in smaller crews with low profiles. They learned to ditch the Don image and play the game from the shadows. In 2013, the DEA and other agencies ran a case called Operation Next Day Air. It exposed a trafficking ring from Jamaica to New Jersey to California. 9 people were arrested. They were linked to West Kingston, but not tied to any known posse or Don. That's the new wave. No loud names, no face of the gang, just business. This new style has kept cocaine flowing. In 2012 alone, the Caribbean saw 87 tons of cocaine seized. In 2013, 44 more tons were caught in just 6 months. The route is hot again, the coke's still moving, but now the faces behind it stay hidden. Speaking of which, you've heard about Tivoli, but over in Spanish Town, another beast was running wild. Bulby and the Klansmen, Spanish Town's real bad man. Spanish Town had its own kingpin, and his name carried weight across every garrison in St. Catherine. Now, this ain't just some random place. Spanish Town is one of the oldest cities in Jamaica, once the capital, known for its history and colonial landmarks. But while tourists might come for the architecture or the old courthouse, the streets tell a different story. In the heart of Spanish Town, it's not history that runs things. It's gangs, guns, and turf wars. And for years, nobody ruled it harder than Donovan Bulby Bennett. Donovan Bennett wasn't just a gangster, he was a full-blown Don, the kind who mixed blood with business and moved like a ghost. The streets called him the real shot caller, the one who turned the Klansman gang, also known as Klans Massive, into a force that held Spanish Town hostage for years. Bulby came from King Street, Spanish Town. He wasn't born into power, he built it, one body at a time. It's believed he took out the previous leader, Derek Puppy String Eccleston, in 1993. After that, the throne was his. From the early 90s, he turned the streets into a war zone, clashing with the One Order gang and dropping bodies in broad daylight. But Bulby wasn't just about warfare. He knew how to stack cash, too. His empire had over 80 vehicles, from construction trucks to haulage rigs. That wasn't just for looks, it was part of his hustle. Behind the blood was a business, and the business was booming. His extortion game was tight. Taximen, local shops, and even big business operations had to pay up or get shut down. From the heart of Spanish Town to Old Harbor, Portmore, and even May Pen, Bowlby's reach was strong. At one point, cops thought he skipped to the UK under a fake name. Man was slippery, but the heat eventually caught up to him. And when they came knocking, he didn't come quietly. Bowlby wasn't the type to hand himself over. He knew what he'd done. Cops had him linked to over 80 unsolved murders, not to mention charges of assault and extortion. So when Operation Kingfish rolled up to a spot in Tanakite District, Rock River, the whole place lit up. Bowlby and his driver died in a gunfight with police and soldiers. Another man was taken in, but the Don was gone. At the time of his death, his empire was said to be worth $100 million. Not bad for a man who started in the trenches. And what kind of gun did they find on him? A .50 caliber Desert Eagle, worth around $2,000. That tells you everything. Bowlby didn't move cheap. He moved like a boss. But what dropped jaws was what came next. Investigations showed political ties, in fact, deep ones. Word was members of the People's National Party, PNP, had been backing him, feeding him intel, protecting him in PNP-run areas. That level of support made Bowlby nearly untouchable, until he wasn't. And when he died, the streets erupted. His crew started firing at Spanish Town Police Station. They blocked roads. They even burned effigies of National Security Minister Dr. Peter Phillips. The whole city felt it, because the man who once ruled the Klansmen was gone, but his soldiers were still on the ground, angry and ready to retaliate. After Bowlby, the Klansmen gang split in two. One side stayed loyal to the old way. The other gave rise to a new faction, the One Don Gang. Leading that breakaway group was Andre Bryan, known on the streets as Black Man. He wasn't some random upstart. Blackman had been Bowlby's top hitman. He learned the game from the inside. He knew the plays, and when he broke away, he did it with blood. According to witnesses, Blackman started killing off the old crew, especially anyone loyal to Tesha Miller, the leader before him. Their beef exploded around 2017, but the shift started earlier. In 2016, both Bryan and Miller were on trial for a 2008 murder. Prosecutors said Miller ordered the hit and Bryan pulled the trigger. But when the dust cleared, Miller got 38 years and Bryan walked free. Now free and unchallenged, Blackman went wild. One witness said he laughed when he heard someone got killed on his orders. Another said he was obsessed with murder stats. He once asked a man to look up how St. Catherine ranked in killings across Jamaica. When he found out they weren't number one, he scolded his crew for being too slow on the hit list. That's how cold he was. But it wasn't just bullets. It was structure too. Blackman had over 400 members. Everyone had roles. There were drivers, shooters, spotters, lookouts, and even a banker. The man ran it like a corporation, except the product was fear and the currency was blood. By late 2021, the Jamaican government had had enough. They hit back hard. 33 members of the One Don Gang were brought to trial. It became the largest gang case in the island's history, which was a real landmark. Charges included murder, extortion, arson, and illegal gun possession. But this wasn't just about crimes. It was a mirror held up to the island, showing how deep gang culture had become. The witnesses told everything. They said Klansmen had evolved, no longer a street gang, but a third-generation gang, one with leadership, hierarchy, and connections to big names. They weren't just moving cash and guns, they were getting paid by powerful people. One witness said the gang extorted between $80,000 and $100,000 a week just from bus operators. A loan company called Torpedo paid $150,000 monthly to stay safe. And another unnamed group said to involve powerful individuals dropped $200,000 every month. This wasn't corner boy money. This was deep pocket crime, where even celebrities allegedly ordered hits. But among all of these, there was one darkest revelation: a secret burial site in Rivoli, Spanish Town. Cops found 2 bodies, but the whispers say there's more. Witnesses say the Klansmen crew used that spot to dispose of their enemies quietly and efficiently. With all this laid out in court, the trial didn't just put gangsters on display, It pulled the curtain back on how organized and dangerous these networks had become. The kind of gang that doesn't just shoot in the streets, but moves in boardrooms, pays off big names, and turns the city into a battlefield. Because in Spanish Town, after Bowlby and Blackman, the line between badman and boss disappeared. But just when you thought you'd seen it all, shooters, dons, and secret burial sites, the courtroom revealed one more twist. This time it wasn't a man with a gun, but a woman with a Bible. And her role in the gang shook people even more, because in the heart of this deadly network stood a pastor. She looked like a woman of God, but behind the pulpit, Stephanie Christie was playing a whole different game. Out of the 33 Klansmen gang members put on trial, she was the only female in the lineup. But don't let that fool you. Her role was serious. Prosecutors said she wasn't just involved. She was handling business affairs for the gang, dealing with the money moves, and keeping their ties with the police clean. A trained pastor by day, but in the streets, she was the fixer. Witnesses painted her as the one who could make problems disappear. If something went wrong, either a gang member got picked up or a situation with the cops got sticky. Christie stepped in. She'd go straight to the station, talk to the right people, and figure out what was happening. One witness told Loop News she would communicate with the police if there is a problem with gangsters. She was the bridge between the gang and the law, playing both sides. She also moved like a messenger for Andre Bryan, aka Blackman, the boss. When he didn't want to speak over the phone, Christie handled it. She carried sensitive messages between members, keeping his name out of conversations and his hands clean. In a gang full of killers, she earned her place not with bullets, but by making sure the machine ran smooth. But bringing a gang like this to court isn't easy. It's risky, expensive, and full of pressure. This trial is the first real test of Jamaica's new anti-gang laws. The Justice Ministry had to pour in big money. Over 40 lawyers are working on this case, but no matter how tight the charges sound, winning in court isn't guaranteed. People still remember the Uchense Wilson trial in 2020. It lasted 9 months, cost the government a fortune. Wilson got 26 years, but 15 others, including a police officer, walked free because the witness statements weren't strong enough. Even now, in the Klansman case, over a dozen members already beat their charges. So you see how in Jamaica's courts, even when the Don falls, not every soldier goes down with him. But not every story comes out of Spanish Town. Across Kingston, another corner had its own legend. A Don who mixed dance hall with danger, Willie Haggart. The rise of Willie Haggart, Black Rose's crew. He wasn't born a Don, but by the end, no one questioned his power. Willie Haggart, real name William Augustus Moore, came up hard in the streets of Kingston, Jamaica. They called him Haggart, a street version of Hogheart, meaning fearless, cold-blooded, and ready to take on anything. He was the third child in his family and went to Jonestown Primary, but his real lessons came straight from the road. As a teenager, he joined the Wild Bunch crew under a known street figure, General Starkey. That's where he first tasted what gang life really meant. He saw money, guns, loyalty, and betrayal. Then in 1981, Starkey was murdered, and things shifted. Haggart moved overseas for a while, keeping his head low and his connections tighter. But when he came back to Jamaica, he wasn't just another man on the block. He had already caught cases. In 1980, he was convicted for illegal possession and fined JMD $50. Not much money, but enough to mark his name on police records. Then in 1993, they caught him with weed and gave him another fine. Then again in 1995, he got charged with robbery with aggravation. That one didn't stick. Case dismissed. But by then, Haggart didn't need the courts to tell him who he was. His name was already ringing in the streets. And it was only the beginning. The next move would take him straight to legend status. In the early 90s, Haggart stepped into something bigger than just gun talk. He was invited by Bogle, a famous dancer in the Jamaican scene, to join a group called Roses. It wasn't just a dance crew, it was vibes, money, street power, and a whole lifestyle wrapped in music and street code. Haggart brought the muscle, Bogle brought the moves, and together they built something wild. This wasn't just a few guys partying, it became the Black Roses crew. And on Lincoln Avenue in Kingston 13, what they call Black Rose's Corner, the whole crew posted up, chilling, creating, and running the block. The corner became famous. You'd see dancers like Bogle, Ice, and the Don himself, Willie Haggart, sitting like kings. Music videos were shot there, big names rolled through. Barrington Levy's Work, Beanie Man's World Dance, all had pieces of that corner's soul. Even the Willie Bounce, a dance move, was made to honor the Don himself. That's how tight music and gang life were in that area. Haggart wasn't just holding turf, he was helping build a whole culture. He had the cash, he had the pull, and everybody from dancers to dons respected him. But good vibes don't last long in the game. One by one, the top men of Black Rose's crew started falling. Haggart was shot dead in 2001. Bogle was killed in 2005. Ice didn't make it past 2008. The crew that once brought joy to the streets now had more dead than living. And with each funeral, the Black Rose's Corner grew quieter. Years passed. Journalists returned to Lincoln Avenue, but the fire was gone. The place that once made the world dance now looked empty, broken. Murals of Bogle peeled off the walls. The music was gone. The party stopped. Inside a dusty bar, a few men flipped through photo albums pointing at friends who didn't make it. One of them was Michael Stewart, a young dancer who never got to meet Bogle. But he said something that hit hard. If Bogle was here, the community would have been better. To him, Bogle wasn't just a dancer, he was a leader. Someone who kept the peace in a city that barely knew the word. Another voice came from Lonsdale Boise Guy, one of the last surviving Black Rose's members. He joined in '97. He said straight up, after Bogle died, the peace died with him. The crew broke, friends turned enemies. Even Ice tried to pull things together, but he was already caught in the street war. He got gunned down like the rest. Tourists stopped coming, celebrities stopped hanging out. The dreams of making that corner the Sunset Boulevard of Jamaica faded fast. Boise remembered how they planted palm trees, how the place used to buzz with girls and cameras, but now, nobody even dared to dance there anymore. Still, they tried to keep something alive. Every year on April 18th, the block holds a memorial dance for Haggart, but Bogle's memorial? That has to be somewhere else. As Boise said, he was known by so many, it needed a bigger space. But even with the memories, gunshots still echo. Boise admitted, I wouldn't want to be the one to hold a peace dance. Too much fear, too much blood spilled, and no leader left to call for calm. But away from the corner, Haggart had a family. In 1993, he returned to Jamaica and tied the knot with his partner, Angela Little Miss Moore. They had 2 daughters, Siobhan and Andrea, but Haggart's kids didn't stop there. He officially claimed 18 children before he died, and since then, even more people have stepped forward saying they're his. Some say the real number is over 20. Among his sons were Redman, Steve, Ryan, Little Willie, and twin boys named Corian and Carrion. April 18, 2001 was the day everything changed. Haggart was sitting on Lincoln Avenue with 2 friends, Ned Big Bunny Hines and Albert Blackadoosh Bonner. They were talking, chilling, just like any other day. Then a Toyota Corolla rolled up. 3 men jumped out. No words, just gunfire. Big Bunny and Blackadoosh died right there. Haggart was hit bad. He died on the way to the hospital. And just like that, the Don was gone. But the streets didn't forget. Neither did the country. His funeral wasn't small. It took place at the National Arena. And it wasn't just friends and family. Over 5,000 people showed up, and right there, sitting in the crowd, were government ministers. Finance Minister Omar Davies, Housing Minister Carl Blythe, and Transport Minister Peter Phillips. Even Paul Burke of the PNP was there. Businessmen like Dan High Williams showed up. Kenneth Skeng Don Black rolled in with bulletproof cars and outriders. Beanie Man came to pay his respects too. This wasn't just a gangster's funeral. This was the burial of a man who moved across every part of society. From the garrisons to the government, everybody knew the name Willie Haggart. By now, we've walked through some of the most feared names in Jamaica's gangland. From the deadly rise of the Klansman gang with Brian Blackman at the helm, to the chaos left behind by Dudas Coke after his empire crumbled, each Don left his mark on the streets. They weren't just gunmen, they were system men, running entire communities like mini governments. When Blackman moved, Spanish Town felt it. When Dudas ruled, Tivoli Gardens was locked down tight. Then you had the ones like Willie Haggart from the Black Roses crew, Dons who didn't just run corners, they ran culture. Black Roses Corner in Kingston was a hot spot, not just for turf wars, but also for music, dance, and street fashion. Haggart had money, Bogle had moves, and together they turned violence into something people didn't question. It was just the way. And even when these Dons fell, whether through bullets, betrayals, or prison walls, the power didn't disappear. It spread. Smaller crews filled the gaps, new names stepped up, and the war never really ended. One Don dies, another one rises. That's why, even after all the blood spilled and empires broken, gang culture in Jamaica still breathes, and the government knows it. That's why they've been trying everything to shut it down. To fight back, Jamaica had to switch up the game. Over the years, the government passed stronger laws aimed right at the heart of these gangs. One of the main weapons is the Criminal Justice, Suppression of Criminal Organizations Act. It dropped first in 2014 and got a heavy update in 2021. Now it allows the courts to lock up not just the shooters, but anyone connected. If you helped, planned, or even knew what was going down and didn't speak, you could still get charged. That's what they call joint enterprise. But even with that, the streets were still on fire, so the government called in the army. They declared states of emergency, meaning they could roll tanks through hoods, stop and search anyone, and lock people up without a warrant. In February 2023, things went even deeper. They created the Joint Anti-Gang Task Force. These guys weren't just regular cops, they trained like soldiers too. Their job was to hit the gangs where it hurts and gather intel from every corner. But still, guns don't fear badges. So while the government fought with force, others tried peace. Civil groups stepped in with programs like the Peace Management Initiative, VETO, and the Trenchtown Peace and Justice Center. They talked to gang members, cooled down beefs, and tried to stop young kids from picking up the gun. One major program, the Violence Interruption Program under the Citizen Security and Justice Program, saved the country millions in health costs alone. But sadly, it shut down in 2020. Now Jamaica's hoping a new national action plan can turn the tide. They're building it out as a 10-year strategy to stop the bloodshed once and for all. But on the ground, it's still hot. Because even with the laws, lockdowns, and peace talks, every Don that falls leaves space for another one to rise. And in the streets of Kingston, Spanish Town, or Montego Bay, power never stays empty for long. Which gang or Don do you think had the biggest impact on Jamaica's streets and why? And do you think Jamaica's new laws and task forces are strong enough to stop the next Don from rising? Let us know what you think in the comments box below. And if you liked how we presented you this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.